You're not disrespected because you're weak. You're disrespected because you're readable. People can predict your reaction before you even know what you're going to do. They notice when you're trying to please. They know when your words come more from a need to be accepted than from real conviction. And the uncomfortable truth is, the world doesn't test what evokes fear. The world tests what exposes itself too much. You can be competent, loyal, even generous, but if you're too accessible, if you explain too much, if you show yourself too easily, you'll be treated like something ordinary, because anything too transparent loses its weight. People only respect what they can't decode. And the worst part, you were taught the opposite. You were told to be clear, honest, kind, open, to talk things through, to listen, to be available. But no one warned you that in the real world, the more you reveal, the more space others have to manipulate you. Predictability is a weakness, and the one who is always easy to read eventually becomes easy to discard. You've felt this. That meeting where you gave everything you had, yet no one listened. That conversation where you were honest, but walked away feeling smaller. That attempt to be understood, that became a reason for someone to test your boundaries. The problem is not who you are. It's how readable you've become. In this video, you'll understand why the most respected men are the ones who speak the least, why presence commands more than opinion, and why silence, when used right, can be more destructive than any argument. We'll go deep into the tactical codes behind silent respect, the power of unpredictability, and what truly makes someone impossible to ignore without saying a single word. The world doesn't test the strong. It tests the predictable. And the most dangerous part is that it starts subtly, almost invisibly. You smile too much to keep the atmosphere light. You explain yourself so you won't be misunderstood. You share how you feel, hoping to create connection. And without noticing it, you give others everything they need to weaken you. A lot of people confuse visibility with presence, but they're opposites. The more you expose yourself, the easier you are to read. And anything that can be read too easily loses its mystery, loses its tension, loses its power. He learned that the hard way by trying to do the right thing. He was in a leadership position but wanted to be approachable, wanted to show he was human, empathetic, close. He thought that would build trust, but the opposite happened. He began to be undermined through small acts, interrupted, ignored, publicly questioned by people who already knew he'd respond calmly. And the more he tried to assert himself through transparency, the more ground he lost. That's when he understood. The problem wasn't lack of authority. It was excess exposure. He was playing with his cards face up, while the rest of the table was playing poker. As the old saying goes, the dog that barks doesn't scare. The one who shouts all the time loses impact. The one who constantly explains himself loses value. Respect rarely comes from what's loud. It comes from what's uncomfortable, from what cannot be easily read, from what creates tension just by entering the room. Think about the people you respect, the ones who impose a certain distance just by walking in. It's not always because of their title or reputation. It's because they carry something you can't quite name, a raw, silent presence that doesn't need to explain itself. That's not a talent. It's a stance. And it can be learned. The first time he tested this was in a meeting where everything inside him was begging to react. A subtle provocation was thrown at him. In the past, he would have answered calmly, trying to keep things light, but this time he simply looked. Silence. The discomfort spread. No one knew what he was thinking. No one knew what would come next, and that alone was enough to stop further provocations. That day he learned something he would never forget. People don't attack what they can't read. It's not about appearing untouchable. It's about no longer being obvious, being less decipherable, less accessible. Because what's too accessible is always treated as disposable. And the first step to becoming respected is becoming hard to understand. Every framework of silent respect begins with a break in habit. Because what you were taught about communication, explaining, justifying, speaking with clarity, was never designed to earn respect. It was designed to create acceptance. And there's a brutal difference between being accepted and being respected. The first commandment he learned was the most uncomfortable. Never explain yourself. No explanation sounds strong when it's rooted in defense. And every time you try to justify yourself, you send an invisible message. What you think of me has power over me. And just that gesture already weakens your authority. Every explanation is a leak in your power. He learned that during a crisis, when he tried to reason with someone who had already decided to discredit him. The more he spoke, the more he lost, until he stopped. And the silence that followed, that was the turning point. The second commandment is counterintuitive. Speak less than you know. Show less than you feel. Not because expressing yourself is wrong, but because doing it too early with the wrong people is dangerous. He used to believe that vulnerability was a sign of strength, but after being misinterpreted, used, and labeled, he understood that total transparency is just another form of exposure, a kind of emotional nakedness, and those who undress too quickly are always remembered for what they exposed, never for what they built. Predictable people are easy to move across the board, but enigmatic people create hierarchy, and that hierarchy is not formal, it's instinctual. Mystery creates hierarchy. The less people understand about you, the more cautious they become when confronting you. The third commandment became a personal philosophy. Observe more than you react. He realized that every automatic reaction was like handing someone a remote control. If I press this button, he gets angry. If I press that one, he tries to explain himself. He had become predictable and therefore easily manipulated. When he stopped responding automatically, everything changed. At first it felt strange. People insisted, tested, provoked. But he just observed, he felt but didn't react, until they realized there were no visible levers, and they lost interest in trying to control him. That's where respect started to build, because true power begins when you feel everything, but choose what to reveal. Power begins when you observe, and don't react. And the final commandment ties all the others together. Don't generate noise, generate presence. He learned that the most respected man in the room isn't always the most charismatic. He's the one with silent gravity, the one who doesn't need to prove anything, the one who doesn't chase acceptance, the one who doesn't fill space with nervous energy. He started training that through his body, walking slower, breathing deeper, holding his gaze. One day, he entered a room where no one ever noticed him. He said nothing. He just sat down, and he was noticed. The respect didn't come from what he said. It came from how he carried himself, from restraint, from energy. Noise distracts, but presence imposes, and presence can't be explained. It's felt. But holding that presence takes discipline, because one mistake, and everything collapses. Respect is built long before the first word is spoken. It's in how you enter, how you take up space, how you look, and most importantly, in what you refuse to do. Most people try to assert themselves by talking loud, gesturing too much, explaining everything. But what really commands respect are the subtle details no one trains. The first is simple but brutally effective. Enter in silence, with steady posture. No forced smiles, no rush to make a statement. The first presence he ever practiced was simply to walk in and observe. And it was enough. Because when someone walks in quietly, but with a body that says, "I know who I am," others feel it. And they respect it. The second detail is the eyes. And we're not talking about a confrontational stare, but a calm, unwavering gaze. One that holds firm even when others look away. The kind of look that doesn't ask for approval. It simply observes. He began practicing this deliberately. He stopped smiling by reflex, stopped averting his eyes out of discomfort, and started looking with the energy of someone who says, "I have nothing to hide, but I also won't explain myself." The effect was almost immediate. People who used to interrupt him started waiting. People who used to test him began lowering their tone, because respect is transmitted through the eyes long before it's declared with words. The third key lies in rhythm, responding with pauses, never in haste. Most people reply too fast, as if every second of silence threatens their image. But when you respond slowly, not out of arrogance, but out of presence, you shift the tempo of the conversation. He realized his rush to answer came from the fear of seeming unprepared, but when he traded speed for intention, everything changed. People stopped trying to beat him with words and started trying to match his silence. The pause became a sign of control, because the one who commands his own time commands everyone else's. And finally, one of the most underestimated rules: leave at your peak, avoid long goodbyes. Many people destroy the authority they built simply because they don't know how to end things. They over-explain, overthank, overstay. He began training the opposite, ending meetings at their highest point, walking away from conversations while still in control, refusing to drag out what's already been delivered. And the effect was clear. People felt his absence like a cut. They wanted more. That's what respect is, leaving a trail of presence, not noise. Like a tiger that doesn't need to show its teeth. He just appears. And because of that, everyone feels it. There's a kind of presence that intimidates without raising its voice. Not because of explicit power, but because of the doubt it creates. The sense that something might be hiding behind the silence. He discovered this the moment he stopped being constant. Before, he was the kind of man who was always available, always accessible, always present. And he thought that's what strengthened bonds. But the effect was the opposite. The more present he was, the more invisible he became. People get used to what's always there, and everything that becomes obvious loses its value. The first silent weapon he learned to use was calculated absence, disappearing at the right time, not as a form of escape, but as a strategy. Well-used absence strengthens presence. He noticed this when he stopped replying immediately to messages that screamed urgency, but lacked true importance. When he stopped showing up to the same places, with the same people, out of habit. And the result? The ones who once took him for granted started to recalibrate their perception. Because when something disappears, the brain has to deal with the void. And that absence creates discomfort. The exact kind of discomfort that repositions you in someone's mind. It's counterintuitive, but it works. Disappearing briefly can make more noise than constant presence ever will. And that's where the second weapon comes in, unpredictability as armor. He realized that being predictable was a sentence. He was too easy to manipulate. People knew when he would stay quiet, when he would agree, when he would justify himself, and they used that against him, sometimes with charm, sometimes with passive aggression. But once he started breaking the pattern, everything changed, responding differently, not reacting, changing his tone, sometimes saying nothing, sometimes simply walking away. He became harder to read, and that created an invisible shield, because people fear what they can't predict, and they respect what they can't control. But the most powerful move was understanding that he could make others uncomfortable by doing absolutely nothing, just by refusing to follow the script. When someone expected an answer and got silence, when someone expected a smile and got a neutral stare, when someone expected justification and got absence. Breaking the expectation disarms people. And more than that, it exposes those who rely on emotional predictability to manipulate. The most dangerous man is the one you can't predict. That sentence became his code, not for style, but for survival. Not being read was the only way not to be consumed. Being dangerous has nothing to do with making threats. It's about unsettling others through doubt. It's about becoming a piece on the board no one knows if it'll move, or blow everything up. But to sustain that tension, you have to remain whole. And that's what separates those who merely go silent from those who dominate. The first time he understood the power of dominating without speaking was in an argument he chose not to win. Everything in that situation demanded a reaction. The provocations, the stares, the clear attempt to destabilize him, but he said nothing. He just breathed, stayed quiet, and it was exactly that silence that disarmed the other person. The first strategy he learned that day was simple. Use silence as your final response. Not as avoidance, but as positioning, because silence disturbs those who rely on your imbalance to feel strong. And what he discovered is that in many cases not reacting is more offensive than any comeback, because the one who doesn't feel obligated to respond has already won the power dynamic. The second strategy is subtle and lethal. Let people project who you are, and never correct them. The most common mistake among those who seek respect is trying to control how others perceive them. He used to do that all the time, explaining, clarifying, justifying, until he realized that effort only made him smaller. When he stopped correcting the versions others created of him, something strange happened. He began to occupy multiple roles at once. To some he was cold, to others wise, to a few dangerous. But in all cases, he was respected. Because what isn't explained becomes enigmatic, and what is enigmatic automatically becomes superior, not out of arrogance, but contrast. The third strategy is the deepest and the hardest of all. Master your energy before trying to master any environment. He realized that the root of all his past failures was internal instability, the urge to react, the need to assert himself, the impulse to defend. When he started observing his own triggers, his breathing, the way his body tensed up, everything shifted. He began adjusting his state before entering any room. He breathed deeply, straightened his posture, silenced his mind. And suddenly he no longer needed to force presence. He became presence. The room responded to what he didn't say. And that was the turning point, because before he could dominate anything external, he had to command his own gravitational field. These strategies don't sparkle. They don't bring applause. They won't put you in the spotlight. But they will make you the kind of man who doesn't need the spotlight, because he carries a power that lingers. That applies pressure without threat. That moves without noise. And that's the kind of power that silently dominates every room. But to apply this, you'll need more than understanding. You'll need rupture, patience, discipline. Because true respect isn't earned through clever phrases. It's built through subtle actions and maintained in absolute silence. The world will keep testing you, not because it's cruel, but because it always tests what appears fragile. And every time you react on impulse, over-explain or reveal yourself too soon, you confirm exactly that you're easy to read, easy to decode, easy to manipulate. But now you know what's behind that cycle, and you understand that respect doesn't come from noise, but from contained tension, from absence that weighs, from silence that disturbs. So the question is, what will you do with this now? In which part of your life have you been too predictable? Where have you been trying too hard to be accepted when you should have been feared? Think about your interactions. Think about the times someone tested you and you reacted like always. Think about the moments you tried to explain when the smartest move would have been to leave. You already know what needs to be done. And now, everything depends on your ability to hold back, to observe, to stay silent when they expect you to react, to disappear when they expect you to explain. If any part of this video gave you something real, then do this. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, you'll keep receiving the codes that aren't pretty, but work. Cold strategies, uncomfortable truths, silent movements. Because in the end, you don't need to raise your voice to dominate. You just need one thing, to know exactly when to stay silent.